Steyer, he's advertising to people online, and people who are online as opposed to watching the TV are part of that polling blind spot. That's why they call it Mondays
with Mike.
With Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Yeah, sorry to go on at length on the governor thing. The points I wanted to make were qualitative in nature and having to do with the success of governors in running for president in the last 50 years. I think that the last 50 years essentially represents, you might have to go back to 1960, maybe the 1940s, but that whole progression has evolved into America as we know it. So may I begin with laying out the case for choosing governors?
Yeah,
as nominees?
Sounds great. Let's.
Yeah. So, just keeping it short here, I became interested in the California governor's race because of the national media attention that it is receiving. Suffice it to say, California is a big state, but we don't really think about just how big it is. Its population is the largest in the Union. Its economy is the largest in the Union. Its territory, no, but it's big territorially. But its economy is so big that it would be fourth in the world, with the first being the United States as a whole, the second being China. I'm not sure where the United States without California would fall, whether above or below China. But then Germany, then California, as California has recently surpassed Japan. So it's a world power, we could say, conservatively. And its governor, therefore, has got to be a competent person and is likely to be a strong candidate for president. So California was a big state in the 20th century, and indeed two politicians from California, Nixon and Reagan, their governor, rose to being president. And the position of governor as well puts somebody in a prime position to later be elected president. So in the last 50 years, there have been 13 presidential contests. 8 of them have been between somebody who was or had been a governor and somebody who was never a governor. Of those 8 contests between governors and non-governors in the last 50 years, the governor has won 6 of those presidential elections, the non-governor 2. It makes sense. A governorship is an executive position, an important executive position, probably the most analogous elected office to the presidency. So, it would behoove us to start paying attention. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yes, in terms of state politics, it's the most analogous. Technically, Eisenhower, when he was the Supreme Allied Commander, pretty much all the forces in World War II, was more analogous to the president because he had both a political element, but also he had command of military forces, which the governor of California does with the National Guard, but not super really, not compared to the foreign policy stuff and the foreign military engagements. But no, you're right. In terms of domestic politics, absolutely. Governor is a very good testing ground.
Yes, bereft of foreign policy experience, except in terms of trade negotiations, they visit other countries, whatever, they don't have a military, it's true. And it's so interesting because Mike and I did not discuss the Eisenhower example before, because I was a little bit self-conscious that if you went prior to 1960, governors lost. Governors had a losing streak. Dewey in 48, then Stevenson twice in 52 and 56. But I thought, 52 and 56, those don't really count because Eisenhower was clearly a greater executive than that of a governor. He was a great general and a winning personality. Yeah.
Sorry, he's also very unique in terms of presidential elections. There's only been a handful of other actual generals who ran. I'm thinking Polk, Grant, I mean, you're going way back at that point, Washington.
Yeah.
Usually it is a professional politician that runs to be president. It's a rare thing that a non-elected person actually runs. There's a handful.
That's right.
Taft. Taft was a congressperson. He's a weird kid. Taft was all over the place. He was pretty much in every branch of government. He was a very unique guy in U.S. history if you want to study a strange... Anyway, sorry.
No, that's why it's called Mondays with Mike. Yeah, and Eisenhower was, like, Democrats would have been happy to have him as their nominee. Both parties wanted him to be their nominee, so he was a consensus candidate. So my idea was, okay, if I were to include back farther, I would have to specify that Truman defeated Dewey in 48, much as Bush defeated Dukakis in 88. But prior to that, FDR had been a governor, so going back, governors really do have an advantage. I didn't actually look prior to the 20s, but I satisfied myself in saying I could say that something like modern America, contemporary America, the current American age, began 60s, 70s, maybe the 50s.
So if you look at the political timeline, there's two major breaking points for when people started winning more based off their certain types of experience. It's the introduction of the television as opposed to radio, and then the internet as opposed to just television, right? So Barack Obama won in part because he very heavily utilized certain social media practices in the internet compared to his opponent, and it showed, right? McCain just was not as technologically savvy. Romney didn't quite understand memes. So when Obama was making fun of Romney, we don't still have horses and muskets. Part of that was simply just an appeal to the internet meme, social media kind of thing. And it flew by Romney, but Obama always got it, right? That's why he won, because he understood social media, the power of persuasion. Yeah. But that's a big thing that's affected outcomes, is the introduction of televised debates. Because if you look at the historical record, people who listened to the debate between Kennedy and Nixon on the radio thought Nixon won. People who looked at the debate between Kennedy and Nixon on the television thought Kennedy won, because Nixon was sweating, he looked nervous, he didn't quite present well, and Kennedy looked like a celebrity. He looked very polished, and he spoke well, and he knew how to engage with the audience.
Yeah, somebody who sweats giving presentations, me. I wonder if it shows, who knows. But anyway, yeah, so all very good points. So governor is a strong... Yeah, just one real quick plug. Because in 2012, I was very like, oh, that Romney, he doesn't get it. He put his dog on the top of a car, and he thinks that's the thing he should talk about. But he was right about one thing, the ships. I felt guilty for saying, oh, he didn't know what he was talking about the ships. He was right about the ships.
He was right about Russia.
He was right about Russia, too, yeah.
Russia presenting a big threat.
Yeah, I think given that Trump was the nominee, he kind of looked back on 2012 because of literally just the previous election, and you kind of think, oh, I guess that Romney, kind of a good guy as they go. But anyway, let me see. So anyway, we've established that California is a dominant place and that the governor is a dominant office. So we need to pay attention to the California governor's race, and probably to the governor's races of other places, but we haven't got to it yet. This is a two-person production here. We don't have staffs. Maybe my daughter, who's going to be a 2 years old, can be the unpaid intern pretty quick. No, just kidding. So, okay, did you watch the debate? And if so, what did you think?
I did. So over the last week, I actually watched as many of the debates as I could. The interviews and some of those forums they held for especially the leading candidates. I listened to Steyer and Becerra and Hilton's, some of their forums that they did. And what I thought for the debate, you asked me to watch the most recent one in terms of who won, is Becerra. And it's because Becerra became the front runner, and all he had to do to win was to not go down in the polls from the position he was starting the debate. And he didn't. He did not go down in the polls. So all the attacks that they made against him, all the different avenues they were trying to peck away at his front runner status for the Democratic side of Hilton's a whole different thing, but for the Democratic side of the primary, Becerra still got a pretty decisive lead in the polls. There is a bit of an issue in that polls only provide a window, and the way that polls are conducted, this has been going back a while due to phones and land. There's a whole science to how polls are conducted. they don't give as good a picture as they used to. We saw that issue with when Trump went against Hillary Clinton, actually, where pollsters were saying, Hillary Clinton's doing fine in all these places. No, they didn't quite capture the issue that was going on there. And so because California is such a big state and virtually any registered voter can vote in the primary, there's a whole big group of people who aren't being polled and aren't necessarily part of either party, Republican or Democrat, the independents, that could swing this election in a very big direction in terms of percentage points. And so there's at least 4 right now candidates who are within the margin of error that they could be the top 2. It's Becerra, Steyer, Hilton, and then one of the other Democrats. I'm trying to remember which one. I think it's between Katie Porter and there's one other, but there's
San Antonio Mahan.
Maybe, but there's 4 of them that I'm seeing.
Excuse me, San Jose rather.
You're talking about Meehan, the mayor of San Jose, the 3rd largest city, and there's a lot of mayors in it. There's 2 mayors left, but no, it's an interesting thing. There's 7 or 8 candidates that are actually within the margin of error. If you look at their numbers right now from the most recent poll, that could, in theory, be one of the top 2 candidates. For some of them, it's a lower digit percentage chance, but there is a chance is better than no chance at all in politics, because any number of things can happen between now and the end of before polls close and on Tuesday, I think it is. It's a few days from now.
That's right.
Until all the votes are in and the actual results are collected, it's still in play, right? There's still stuff that can happen in terms of commercials, in terms of interviews, in terms of TV, radio. There's a whole long list of things that can happen at the very last second that could still move the election. But of the candidates, there's only a handful of them that are actually in the window where the movement, in terms of the amount of movement that could happen, makes them viable, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So anyways, in terms of the debate, I thought that the 2 winners, I'll focus on the Republican side and the Democrat side. So Hilton's the winner on the Republican side because he still has enough of a percentage to be in the top 2. And Becerra, I thought, was the winner, as opposed to Steyer did not do what needed to be done in terms of, in my opinion, in terms of making a significant enough difference. But it's really tricky because Steyer has spent almost 10 times more than any other candidate and has spent the most in history, in California history, for a primary candidate running for the governor primary election. And money can make, we saw this with Trump when he self-funded his election against Hillary Clinton. Money can do things that are unpredictable. There's ways he could be spending money in terms of ad campaigns, online campaigns, certain types of advertising that's very targeted, like hyper targeted, that we don't know about, but the people that it's being targeted at do know about, right? And that's where it becomes a real question mark.
In particular, because with Steyer, that he's advertising to people online, and people who are online as opposed to watching the TV are part of that polling blind spot that we talked about.
Look, some people don't own phones, but they own computers. Some people don't own computers or phones, but they go to the library to go on the internet for finding information. Some people, a considerable amount actually, own neither a phone or a computer and can't access the library. And also there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of homeless people in California that are very difficult to speak with and poll and get information from, but they're voters, right? They can weigh in and they can swing in a primary. The whole issue with primaries is that voter turnout is so low that there's any number of intangibles that could move the election in ways that you would think, is that really going to move it? And the answer is yes. So the example that I think of all the time, just in terms of history, is Karl Rove and his Bag of Dirty Tricks, where he got a bunch of people to show up at a rally. There's a whole thing, but the point is that politics is it's a messy game, and things happen in all sorts of ways that are unpredictable. Like this thing with Becerra, there's at least 2 controversies that are happening that are still ongoing. Who knows the effect that they're going to have?
I'm wondering about that, but we can come back to that later.
I'm not so sure they're going to register for the primary, but they might register in the general election. It's how it plays out. But it's one of those things where it's just super, the way that they're engaging with each other to try and drive down the numbers against their opponent is creative. It's unexpected. And in some cases, it's mean, right? We can talk about that a little bit for Katie Porter if you want. of how her campaign was getting attacked because she's the only woman in the race, and so there's a whole
Right.
strategy involved for how to reduce the appeal of her as a female candidate. That's being utilized and has been utilized. In particular, that video of her yelling at a staffer.
Interesting. So you would attribute that to, let's say, an op of some kind, like an operation, like a campaign.
I didn't do that. She did that. So she
Okay.
mentioned that the video that was presented was a video that was U.S. government property because it was a discussion she was having with a government official about energy policy, and that its release happened because of a public records request. But to know how to get that information required some political acumen. Specifically, you had to know that the discussion happened, you had to know when it happened, you had to know who to ask for the files, and the person who ultimately stumbled upon it and got it released. There's a whole thing, if you listen to how Katie Porter explains it, that it was a political strategy being employed by one of her opponents in the primary. She's claiming it was Tom Steyer's staff was the one who released that video and is using it to try and attack her reputation. There's a whole rabbit hole there for Katie Porter that makes her a difficult candidate in terms of winning. If you just look at her Wikipedia page, which I did, I was very curious. I was like, how is she the last female candidate in the race? And it's because she's a very capable politician, right? She ran for Congress. She got elected to Congress. She was very good on the oversight committee at speaking to the American public in a very direct way. The whiteboard thing and the hearings and grilling the various corporate leaders in a very effective way. She's a very able communicator. The concern with Katie Porter is that she's got some difficulty, it seems, with anger. Because if you look on her Wikipedia page, it's listed that the reason she got divorced was irreconcilable differences and both her and her ex-husband had to go through anger management courses, and she took out a protective order against her ex-spouse and then had to take out another protective order against a former boyfriend, which tells me that there are some issues there with anger, with interpersonal communications. And it was brought up multiple times in multiple debates and interviews with Katie Porter. Can you work with people? Can you oversee a government agency of thousands of workers from all walks of life, some who might be testy, right? Antagonistic, a little difficult to talk to, right? Because remember, a governor is the governor of everybody, including the opposing party that didn't vote for you. And you have to still talk with stakeholders. You still have to talk with sheriffs and county councils and all the people, right? All the representatives. And you would have to deal with Trump, right? You'd have to figure out a way to communicate in an effective manner with the sitting Republican president, assuming a Democrat wins. That takes a certain degree of, I don't know, finesse, compromise.
The personality trait of cool under pressure is an extremely valued one in our society. If you lose it, that just creates a lot of damage, a lot of social damage for you.
It's a tough one to inculcate, right? To essentially to stare a crisis in the face and not panic, not scream, not yell, to act, right? And to act decisively. And that's one of those things that's super difficult. And for politicians, there's a ceiling for how far they can progress in their careers, right? Because once you reach the level of being like a representative or a statewide office or a national office, you generally don't want to go backwards, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll run for like a mayor, or they'll try to head up be a president of a university system. Those are big jobs, right? And government translates great into those jobs. But anyways, sorry for going down that tangent. It's just I was very curious. The skills that make Katie Porter effective at getting to the job that she did of being a representative, she's very good at communicating. She's great at explaining things because she is a professor and was a professor. She's great at explaining things in a way that's easy to understand. It's just that might be really great as a representative, like a congressperson, because the congressperson's a truth-seeking role. But governor is a mediator role, right? That you have to get the various stakeholders together and get them to shake hands. It's a diplomatic role. And so that's why I'm saying, and I could be wrong, but my prediction is Becerra is going to win as one of the top two. And he's my odds-on favorite, unless barring some October surprise, of winning the whole thing. Because if you look at his resume, because I listened to a bunch of his interviews and I looked at his resume and I read through his history, and he's worked in every level of government that you can think of in terms of like national, federal government. In that he's other than the judiciary, but he's interacted with the judiciary as the attorney general. But he
Yes.
was a congressperson for 24 years. He was the attorney general of California, meaning that he aggressively had to defend California's interests and did. And then by being a member of the cabinet at the executive level, he's got a very nuanced understanding. And this is where I think it's actually super important to mention housing or health and human services, the department that he was running, is one of the ones that most directly interacts with states because of Medicare and Medicaid in particular, because they're the ones that disperse the funds to the states when they run their Medicaid programs. Because remember how Medicaid works is that the states run their own sort of Medicaid system and the federal government reimburses them. It's not the federal government running it. It's the states have their own kind of, I don't know how to explain it. They have their own unique spin on health insurance, and then the federal government gives them money. But anyways, that the whole point is that he has a very nuanced understanding of the demands that states face, which would serve him well as governor.
Yeah. No, I think that we are on the same page about that. I don't think so. To put the conclusion out front here. First of all, it's a top two primary, and for a short time, the poll before Democrats coalesced behind Becerra, I think it was Hilton in front, and that sheriff guy was briefly in second place. And there's like, are two Republicans going to win the top two primary? That does not look very likely at this point. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll interject once more. So we talked about who I thought won the debate. I can tell you decisively who I thought lost the debate, and it's Bianco, the sheriff, because he made an insult to Katie Porter as a mother.
Oh, yes.
And that's not going to go well with female voters at all. He lacked a certain kind of charisma that you want from a politician. So if there's one thing for Becerra that I don't like, it's that he doesn't really have any kind of charisma at all. He's very even keeled, right? He's like a very calm, very careful speaker, but he doesn't speak in a way that gets people to.
You're not going to have a lawman make a sales pitch. It doesn't quite, the personality doesn't quite.
Yeah, no. So for Bianco, his issue is that he speaks in a very narrow window in terms of Republican politics. But there's a reason I think Trump didn't endorse him as opposed to Hilton, is that Hilton's got a much more similar record to Trump in terms of the TV experience of talking to a national audience in a manner that's effective at communicating a message. So I think Trump gravitated towards that because that's Hilton's experience, that he's able to communicate to a TV audience in a way that they'll listen. So I've been listening to these debates. Hilton's a very good communicator. I don't like the things he's saying, but he's great at communicating those things to the people. Becerra's not. Okay, so I'll say this. Swalwell was very good at communicating, very effective at communicating. The problem with Swalwell he's a politically compromised candidate. He's lost his job and he's not in the race anymore. But for a very brief window of time, he was in the lead. But just because someone is an effective politician doesn't necessarily translate into them being like an ethical person.
Yeah, you can say that again.
A good person, right? Like just because you can feed a speech into somebody and they can talk and present well doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to do the job well. But I think where the difference occurs in my mind between some of those candidates. So Hilton's really good at running for a campaign and doing the promotional stuff. But I don't see anything in his record that indicates that he would be even remotely good at running a state government. I don't see it. The only one, there's a handful there that could, I think, do the job okay. So the guy who was the mayor of Los Angeles, he could do it.
Yeah.
He'd be fine.
Villaraigosa.
Meehan, the mayors would be fine, right? Because they have to manage on a day-to-day basis all the various challenges that cities face. They could do it. I'd buy it. Becerra, I think, could do it because he's got executive experience of running a major agency. So if you look at the budget of Health and Human Services, he's right. It's huge. It's $1.something trillion. It's a giant budget.
Yeah.
It's huge, lots of moving parts. I think Steyer could probably do it just because he ran a company He's run successful political campaigns. You were asking in the show notes, what's Steyer's deal?
Yeah, I can explain what I meant, but you go first.
I'll give you my take on it. So having listened to his various interviews, the forums that he did, the various debates, his deal appears to be that he's trying to build up more political capital, even if he doesn't make it as a nominee, to get better name ID within California for the various political campaigns that he does. So the various propositions, the nonprofits that he runs, it's a vehicle for self-promotion, essentially. That Steyer, being a rich billionaire, instead of just being somebody who donates to political campaigns, he wants to be in on the marketplace of ideas itself and actively. Sure. So do you remember Ross Perot, where Ross Perot was not happy with George H.W. Bush? And so what does Ross Perot do? He goes, I don't like that George H.W. Bush guy. I'm just going to be the wrench in the whole thing. And he spends an exorbitant amount of money, buys out blocks of time on TV, gives those. I've listened to a few of those lectures. They're a little silly, but he gives those lectures. But the point is that in a democracy like ours, because of Citizens United, they can, absent some public funding of elections where every candidate's got a fixed amount that they can spend at the end, right? Literally anybody with enough money can jump in and just spend as much as they want doing campaign ads, getting into debates. And what I think Steyer's doing, if he doesn't get the nomination, is that this is an opportunity for him right now that all he had to do was get within the window of candidates who are viable in the polling to get a seat in the debates, right? That the debates do have a sort of gatekeeping mechanism that you cannot get on the debate stage unless the news organizations perceive that you actually have a chance of winning within the polls. And so I think for Steyer, maybe he's serious about being governor. He could be. I don't know that he would be a good governor because he has virtually no actual elected representative experience. He's got no experience actually managing a political organization in elected office. He does have experience getting things passed from the outside in, right, of a proposition or political movement. He's pretty good at that. What I do think him more than any of the other candidates, because he spent so much money, it's screaming to me that he's got his eye on something else, right, down the line if he doesn't become governor. And this is the best opportunity right now to rapidly increase his name ID, right? Because all the eyes, you were mentioning this before, all the eyes of the U.S. right now are on the governor race. All the national media, all some of the international media, because it's such a big economy, it has implications for them. And if Steyer wants to get political capital outside of just California, right, if he wants to do stuff in other states or throughout the country, he has to get better recognition. People have to know his name. This is the way to do that. Because for every million he spends, he could get 5 million, 10 million in earned media somewhere else. It's the strategy Trump utilized against Hillary Clinton. So what Trump was doing is he spent a little bit of money for him, but he got a lot of money in terms of the value that he was getting of the media talking about him. And this is where Hillary Clinton, in my opinion, actually failed drastically. It was either her or her advisors did a really poor job, was that Trump was out there every day. He calling into radio shows, calling into TV shows, talking to everybody that would talk to him, magazine interviews, you name it. There's a whole long list of things that he was doing to try and get people to talk about him. For better or worse, they were talking about him. Hillary Clinton hid away. When I was looking at the numbers of how long, she went almost 100 days without talking to the press, without giving any kind of press interview, press release, any kind of conference. Trump's out there every day, just constantly hammering whatever his message was, and Hillary Clinton wasn't. So I think this might be that for Steyer, is that this presents him the opportunity where they might otherwise be ignoring him, right? He's just this sort of eccentric billionaire trying to accomplish the things he wants to do. They have to notice him if they're reporting on politics because he's one of the candidates.
Okay, Clinton in 2016 was working off the old political playbook. And the old political playbook had sunset, and we didn't know it yet. But it was because, with the internet and social media, new methods came up. And the primary new method, the decisive new method, has been the ability of billionaires, as you're saying, to harness both old and new media in an adept way that others don't understand yet. So I think Steyer I think you're right, he's trying to do that. He's trying to do Exactly that. Now, since we're speaking of Steyer, he very much strikes me. I look at him and I'm like, there's a San Francisco man. There's a man in the polite society of the rich and socially conscious of San Francisco. I think you've hit it on the head in terms of what Steyer's strategy is. But I think that even though a billionaire can buy their way onto the debate stage, they still haven't figured out how to speak the language that everybody else, that I think most of the other candidates except Bianco, were able to speak in terms of, yeah, this is how the public is thinking about it. I think that you make a good point with Porter as well, because I also noticed, and I thought that her points, that she had the reasoning ability that sort of surpassed the rest of them to some degree. I thought the mayor of San Jose, Mahan, was also a very promising candidate, but he's a millennial. He was born in the early 80s, so I think his day has yet to come. But I thought it was a real shame with Katie Porter that she does have that info about her, and that there may or may not be anger issues. I'm not really going to say, but I thought it was very effective when Steyer started talking about how Steyer said California is the richest country in the world. Porter, you're the richest person on this stage. I thought that you got to have some kind of ability. So I think she does have a great ability, and I hope she finds a rehabilitation in all of this.
Here's the issue I see with Steyer. It's pretty straightforward. It's a metaphor that he's a wolf in wolf's clothing, meaning that by virtue of being a billionaire in capitalism, you have to make money. And the way that he made money is in some respects in direct contravention with the things he's talking about now. In particular, some of the holdings that he had in his company before he made the money from selling it. I don't know exactly how he made the money, but he made the money. The one that I noticed that really screamed to me this may be a political liability for him was that they had holdings in private prisons in I think it's the CCA, the Correction Corporations of America. And the issue running as a Democratic candidate in this day and age is that there's a real move. I'm sure you've noticed in the Democratic Party in particular to start taxing billionaires to their eyeballs on either a wealth tax, a billionaire's tax, or a progressive income tax, what just happened in Washington State, where people who make money over a certain amount get taxed more for that money. And so the issue is that being a billionaire is a choice, specifically continuing to be a billionaire when somebody's accumulated that amount of money. I understand what he's saying about the giving pledge and giving away most of his money instead of it going out as an inheritance. I get that. But by virtue of having the money and accumulating the money and sticking with the money, he's like a dragon, right? Trying to convince people that he's not going to eat them. Essentially, that he's Smaug. He's got a giant hoard of money, and he's trying to convince the villagers, the peasants, I'm not going to build a giant castle and surround it with a moat with alligators and have my own little army. We're going to make a difference. Everything's going to be great. Don't bring the pitchforks to me. And it's complicated, right? So there have been rich presidents in the past. George Washington, very wealthy. He was one of the largest landholders in the U.S. at the time. Jefferson was pretty wealthy. FDR, I don't know exactly how wealthy, but he was wealthy. Wealthy. Ford was very. Actually, no, I'm thinking of someone.
Yeah, he owned Ford Motor Company. No, just kidding.
It's a joke. No. No, the richest right now, obviously, is Trump. He's our billionaire president. But we've seen already, right, that the way that Trump looks at the world is vastly different than past presidents in terms of utilizing the office to make money. And he's made money, right? He's made money, a lot of money. Did you notice that Trump's trading stocks? That he's making money from the
I'm not privy to that, but yeah, people have said.
It's publicly disclosed, right? Like the number of trades and how much money has been spent in the stock. What's going on there, right? It raises very serious questions at any type of political speech that he gives. If he's saying buy certain things, do certain things, act a certain way, does he have a personal stake in whatever he's talking about? Like, that's the issue with something like the emoluments clause or with someone having personal holdings in things. Is the question then becomes, is he doing it to make himself rich, or is he saying it because it's the best thing for the American people? And it's a question of trust, right? I think the American electorate isn't completely ignorant of the reality that billionaires are rich and that the way that they get rich is that they have to squeeze money from, they have to get value from somewhere, right? That to make money in capitalism, you either inherit it, right? Or you have to make it somehow. How do you make it? You make it by getting something that's valued more than you spent getting it. We're seeing that right now with AI. And there's a real struggle with AI right now because so many of those companies that are valued so highly, they haven't actually turned in a profit of any kind, right? So a lot of it's
Yeah.
this sort of imaginary pie in the sky money, but it's not necessarily going to translate into real things.
That's right. Valuation does not mean cash flow.
And so that's the risk you run with someone like Steyer, is that he may be very good at figuring out ways to make money, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's really good in a crisis or really good in of dealing with people who disagree with him, right? Because part of the issue with his message is that he's a little bit to the left of the mainstream.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think of him more like Bernie Sanders trying to run for president, is that he's aggressively pursuing things that doesn't necessarily have the support of most of the American public.
Yeah.
And it's to an extreme that may be polarizing. There you go. That's the word.
Yeah. And by the way, just really quick, because this is a good place to insert it, because it fits into the discussion as we're having it right now. The thing that I noticed was that all candidates, Democrat and Republican, except Steyer, were against a state wealth tax. I think a state wealth tax is a much different thing than a national wealth tax. Proceed.
Yeah, so I understand, but the point here, and this is, I think, getting lost, maybe not lost, I'm sure Steyer understands it, is that our society is multifaceted, it's complex, it's got a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different layers to it. And if he's a billionaire out there saying all the other billionaires don't really particularly like me, it turns out those guys and women own all sorts of things, right? They're massive employers, they own companies, they participate in American society. And this is where I think Steyer, if he were to become the nominee, would still face particular difficulties actually winning to be governor of California, because we're just talking about huge amounts of voters and numbers, is that his message isn't necessarily a winning message. That the reason I see Becerra as even having a chance is that he seems more like he'd compromise on some things as opposed to being an absolutist or an idealist.
Yeah, are you saying that Steyer says that other billionaires do not like him as a person, or what are they, or they don't like his proposals? I would say they don't think that way if it's terms of, I don't want to say all billionaires, but I don't think they really care one way or another.
Let me say, he's not wrong about his assessment. In interviews, he's been saying, look at who's spending money against me and ask yourself why. And so when I say the other billionaires don't like him, I mean that the other billionaires are not supporting his campaign, they're not donating to his campaign, and they are actively spending money to support and defend his opponents, right? And the question always there is why? What do they see from Steyer that they don't see from the other candidates? And the answer is that Steyer, because he in some ways is immune from some of the incentives that other people face because he's a billionaire.
It's like he's uncancelable.
Yes, would be willing to take certain types of actions and risks that would actually cut into the bottom line of these billionaires, as opposed to the system we have, which in some ways, and look, it's a valid criticism of the system we have. Some days it looks like the Democrats are just acting like controlled opposition, that they're funded by the same pool of people as the Republicans, and so they wave their hands in the air and they go, oh, we're going to do something, but then they drag it out, or they don't actually do enough. Or they come up with really muted compromises like Obamacare that seem like they're fixing the problem, but rather they're just delaying the problem. So other countries got on the page that to fix healthcare access in particular and actual outcomes, you have to radically transform the system because you have to have leverage against the medical providers. Essentially, in a single payer systems, what they can do is they say, look, you either make some money or you make no money. Those are your choices. Some money, no money. In the system we have now, there's a variety of avenues in which they can technically still make money through private insurance that doesn't necessarily depend on the government providing any kind of money or resources, which means that there can be medical providers who are very niche, they are very selective in their clientele, and they can still turn a profit even if they charge exorbitant rates higher than anywhere else in the world because there's still a market for them. That's the whole point of why you want a universal healthcare system or a single payer system, is that it creates real competition in the marketplace, that it gives those providers the choice. You either get to participate in the market, or we will find someone who will participate in the market. Those are your options. It
Yeah.
removes that incentive to seek maximum profits by limiting the ceiling on profits they can get. And that particular
Yeah.
message isn't communicated particularly well in the national elections because obviously we don't have a single payer system or a universal healthcare system. And at least for that, I'm saying
Not for all, no.
it's very sad that the American electorate is willing to suffer so much when people in other developed countries don't suffer as much because they figured it out. They did
Yeah.
some variation where they figured out a way to make sure that people can actually get healthcare. Not that they have that pay money to maybe get healthcare. No, they actually get healthcare.
Yeah, because single payer is, look, here's what we're going to pay you, and you have to have X outcomes. Can you do it? Can you make it work? If so, here's the money. Provide the care. Here's the money. Can you do it? If you can't do it, maybe somebody else can. Let's see.
Seems weird, right? That in a private marketplace that there'd be like laziness or stagnation, but that's the whole point. If you create a single payer system where the government says this is it, this is what we will pay, then it spurs innovation because the only
Right.
people who will make money are those who figure out how to reach that number. If they don't do it, nobody makes money. Somebody
Right.
is making money in these single payer healthcare system countries, right? It's just not as much money as it's being made in the United States. And the reason they make so much money is because they lack meaningful competition. The barrier to entry for some of these pharmaceutical companies is so steep, right? Because it's like a 15-year wait. I'm not going to get into all the rabbit hole of why it's so difficult to form a pharmaceutical company and successfully compete with these big companies in the US. But the point is that it's so far beyond the ability of most people to even try that they can demand just ridiculous amounts of money and people will pay it because it turns out dying people will spend almost as much money as they have, if not more, to not die, right? Turns out that's what they'll do. They'll sell everything they own. They'll spend as much money they have. If they don't have it, they'll do it anyways and then declare bankruptcy. That's why we have so many bankruptcies, is that desperate people, it turns out, will do desperate things to not die.
Yeah, and we saw, like I read in the Seattle Times this week, that they're going to ask for something like a second sequential double-digit percentage increase in insurance rates. This is way above inflation. This can't go on. But you make the exact point when you say somebody on death's door will spend any amount of money. Not everybody. Some people are ready to go, but almost everybody on death's door will spend any amount of money. That's not the power that people have. The power that the people have is not in the moments preceding death. It is in the time all before that. It is in saying, here is the system we're going to set up, and you must operate within it and to profiteer. And I'm not saying they're profiteering because the costs are high for them, but we need to make a system where it doesn't cost them that much. If it costs that, let's examine why, and let's figure it out. Oh, it just costs more and more. No. The law is deficient in some way, as is the system. And there's this whole bureaucracy. And there are all these people who have this incentive in keeping it this way.
Yeah, so
Well,
actually, I'll
go
just
ahead.
interject there. When you say there's this whole bureaucracy, that's something very important to talk about. Because in our current system, in some cases, records have to be kept in triplicate. 3 records, 3 different places. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of staff you have to hire. That's a lot of overhead. That's a lot of paper you have to print out, or records you have to keep, or servers you have to maintain,
Yeah.
or whatever, right? And if you apply that to hundreds of millions of people, it adds up, right? And so part of the issue with our system is it's radically inefficient, right? That we have so many middlemen, so much bureaucracy, so much bickering back and forth, and it creates just all this added expense. that a single payer universal healthcare system doesn't necessarily have. So if you don't spend as much money paying out in profits and bonuses and high salaries and all the expenses just to run the thing, you can put that money towards actual care, actual deliverables, right? Actually improving the lives of people. What a crazy concept.
Yeah. Yeah, if we just run on the treadmill for the last 50 years, which has been about how long it's been, the intensity of this, of we need to perform in terms of growth for shareholders at every quarter. And originally you're going to have some low-hanging fruit. And then you're going to find ways of doing it more efficiently. But eventually, if you do that for so long, you're going to just be squeezing. And who do you squeeze? If it's healthcare, at some point you're squeezing the sick. And you're squeezing the people who have to pay the insurance. So you can just look at it in terms of incentives. You can if I were to run my house, it's like we need this house to be cleaner. It needs to be cleaner every quarter for a long time. Pursuing a particular goal, it comes up to a limit. It becomes absurd at some point. At some point it becomes, we've done that goal. We've done that goal. Now we need another goal. Maybe access. Maybe just what can we do cheaply? What do we need to... Anyway, so we were talking about the governorship, or the...
This is actually an important thing to mention for that governor's race and the debate that they're having, specifically about home insurance and fires. Part of the issue in California is that for home insurance, they're relying on a private market, right? And one of the things that they can do in a private insurance market is hire actuaries, assess risk, and decide you're not going to insure it. There is a model of national insurance that isn't a private market. That's national flood insurance down in the hurricane areas in the southern part of the United States. That's different, right? That part of the issue is that when you have private enterprise seeking profits, they're not necessarily focused on outcome. So why do people insure their homes? They insure their homes so that if something bad happens, they could get their home back, right? But the whole game of insurance is that you try to make money from that not happening. So you get to pick who your customers are, right? You get to sign the policies. And then as we saw what happened in California, if the numbers no longer work, you just leave, right? You take your ball and you go home. No more insurance for the people there. So part of the issue, and this goes back to a discussion we've had a long time ago about how government can operate at an extreme loss. They can take on significant amounts of debt and still manage to keep chugging along because they can keep accumulating debt. Private corporations can't do that. They have to deliver at some point to their shareholders or no more corporation. Someone else will come in and do the job instead. The governor of California can, maybe not actually succeed at it, but at least has the bully pulpit to advocate for something better, something different, some meaningful alternative that doesn't rely on private insurers that, for obvious reasons, want to make a profit. And so they make real difficult choice, not difficult for them, but they make choices that have negative consequences for people who want their homes insured, right? Because part of the issue is that their only options for home insurance are the ones that exist in the market now, right? So this is where government does serve a role. It can create innovation to create alternatives to things that exist right now. That's the main benefit of government. For example, Social Security was an alternative to the failure of retirement plans and pension systems. That there was some safety net created for people so they weren't living in the gutter, right? That there was some minimum amount that they could get after a lifetime of work so that they could at least have food and maybe shelter. Obviously, it's not kept up with inflation. It's not kept up with the current housing prices. There are still people on Social Security who do not have enough money to stay housed or to have access to gas and medical expenses and all that. But at least it was trying to address the problem, right? And it was a non-private market solution to a problem. And that's where government plays a key role, is that the governor can lead the way. Actually, a good example is, this is at the national level, is JFK saying we're going to the moon. No one had gone to the moon before. There was no space program. It never existed, right? They had to build it from the ground up. So they did, right? They didn't turn to the private market and say, go to the moon. No, the government said, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to train the people to go to the moon. We're going to figure out how to make it happen. And they did, right? That's what leadership is. That's where there's a real disconnect. That's my issue with Hilton, is that there's a difference between being a critic from the outside in, a commentator on TV, and actually doing the thing, right? Actually doing government work. So Becerra has that resume because he did the work on all sorts of levels of government. He did lawsuits, he did legislative work, he did executive branch stuff with running an agency, all sorts of work. Those mayors are actively every day dealing with all sorts of things. There's only one who's actually currently there, is Meehan. He'd be fine, I'm sure, as governor. He's just a little on the young side, which voters might not want to vote for, right? They want someone with the wisdom of experience.
So, I just wanted to bring it to, I thought that there was, so we think that Becerra is going to win, he's going to get in the top two, and then because he's a Democrat, in California, he's probably going to win the whole thing. One, really quick, I've also noticed, and I need to research this more, that Ferguson won up here, and yeah, he was a Democrat, he was probably going to win, but he also was he really outclassed Reichert on the debate stage in terms of his ability to just speak fluently and without going down the, you vote for Democrats, you get these problems. So, okay, yeah, but what's the solution? Talk about that. Without going down that. So, both were at some point an attorney general. So whereas I'm seeing a governor to president pipeline, there might be an attorney general to governor pipeline. That's just a speculation. I haven't researched
No,
it.
You're not wrong. There is a marked trend of people. There's a reason for it, right? So it's a statewide office, and the issues that attorney generals deal with are very similar to the issues that governors deal with, right? So attorney generals bring the problems to the governors, make decisions on how to deal with those problems, if that makes any sense.
It does, yeah.
Okay. The attorney generals act, but they act with the permission of the governor. So that's the big sort of flip of the coin, really, is they only have really one boss, right? The governor. And so it's an easy transition to go from attorney general to governor.
Let's see. So I also observed really quick that there was a lot of cross-party agreement on a lot of the problems. It wasn't like uniform agreement, but for example, they didn't really seem to disagree on that much with regard to housing. Steyer thought you should harden the homes, and that was very well stated because of the potential for fire. We've talked about that many times. But they all thought you needed more homes, and that involved a degree of deregulation, or at least streamlining. I thought Porter was really on the money with 5% down payments. It might create problems, but we need the houses built. So I thought that was very good, pointed out by her. The GOP didn't like the idea of high-density housing on the transit lines. I think that is I think we need to not rely exclusively on that, but I think, yeah, you just put up a bunch of homes, eventually the price of those homes, if nobody likes them, the price will fall, so people will say, how much don't I like them really? Maybe I'll take it. We need more housing units. So there's a lot of agreement there. Go ahead. Yes, please.
That one is actually really easy to identify from my political science lens, that the Republicans would be advocating for single-family homes or more suburbs or more dispersed housing as a gift to the fossil fuel industry, right? So the more spread out people have to live, the more suburbs, the more they're going to drive with cars, right? And the more cars they have, the more gas that is bought, the more fossil fuels need to be used. The reason that you have denser housing is public transportation. It's because you have better access to buses and trains, and using less, ultimately in the long run, by getting people, instead of driving cars, to ride on buses and trains and stuff. And so that, at least from my perspective, isn't how do we deal with housing? That's much more how do we ensure that the oil companies have windfall profits still, right? Because if you've ever seen the documentary Who Killed the Electric Car, it was tire companies, right? Why would tire companies care about electric cars? In particular, why would they care about electric street cars? Why did they nix street cars being built in cities way back in the day? It's because if you have public transportation like streetcars that don't need tires, a lot less people are going to buy tires, right? It's pretty straightforward, right? So there's that kind of thing going on that isn't readily obvious in a housing debate, but it's the way that you plan, right? If you look at how LA is spread out. It's not a dense city in the sense of New York or Chicago. It's like really big in terms of how the houses are set up and the roads, and that's on purpose, right? Is that they went in a different direction to make more money for cars. That's just my input there.
Sure, yeah, but across the spectrum, everyone's like, yeah, we need more housing, put it in, backyard cottages, etc. So it struck me that in terms of their advocacy, and then a lot of them, the homelessness, no, there was a different thing, because they asked Bianco a lot about it, and he's like, it's a drug problem. So actually there was a difference there. But the point is that everybody seemed to be willing to be pragmatic and find the solutions. Now, whether they're going to do it, that's another matter. And but so the last part I would wonder about this is the scandal. There seemed to be, and it wasn't really stated what the scandal was, and I hadn't read it regarding Becerra when he was HHS.
Yeah, when he was the Health and Humans, the same job that RFK Jr. has.
Yeah. Okay, so talk about that. Is that going to be a problem? If he gets into the top two, he's still going to win, right? Or is the scandal going to be a big problem for him?
It really depends. So the scandal is a little complicated. There was an issue with one of his staffers where they're essentially accused of laundering money from his dormant campaign funds while he was the HHS secretary. Essentially that they were paying themselves more money using campaign money to do it. And apparently, from what I've been reading, is that essentially Becerra was a victim of the fraud. Because look, he would have been prosecuted too if they thought he was part of it. Essentially that he was victim to something where somebody who worked for him had access to these funds and they were utilizing those funds to pay themselves more money. And they were found guilty of doing that, right? That's the controversy. And so the issue is twofold. One, if Becerra, it's ever found out, knew about this in any way, shape, or form and actively endorsed it, that's a crime. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding of the allegation. Two, it speaks to a question of judgment, right? These were people that he personally would have had to oversee and hire in his role, right? Because they were aides and staffers that directly worked for him. And so it speaks to a question of judgment of how did he miss it? How did he not understand it? Why was he not overseeing his own money in terms of the campaign? Because it was a dormant election fund. So the question is, how did he not notice like money was being siphoned away? And the answer is probably because the person who would have told him that the money was being siphoned away was the person who was siphoning away the money. That's usually how that kind of thing happens. That how accountants embezzle money, right, is that they're the ones who oversee the money. They take some money for themselves. They skim from the top. And then anytime there's an audit or any kind of like thing where it's like, how's our money doing? They go, oh, it's just great, right? Because they're the ones who report. And that's why you always want to have like an external auditor or an independent auditor or something where I'm not entirely sure what the journey was to get to this point that they found it, but they found it. They found out that this was happening, and that's the controversy. The other controversy is more complicated, and it has to do with the migrant children while he was HHS secretary going missing, right? And that they couldn't find them. And that was a holdover. That was a continuation of what happened. Do you remember the family separation policy during the first Trump term where they separated kids from their families? They didn't find them all. And that continued while the Biden administration occurred, that they didn't find them all, that there were still kids who've been separated from their families and they didn't reconnect them with their families. And so they didn't exactly know where all the kids went. And that was an issue. And so that controversy, I think, could continue to play out. At least that's my understanding of reading the news about this. There may be more to it, but that's an issue that would come up in the general election, right? Because again, it speaks to a question of oversight and judgment, right? That if they couldn't find them all, why were they not allocating enough resources to find them? Did they not hire enough people? Were the people who were in that job not doing a good enough? What was going on that he could have influenced that wasn't happening, right? And I get it. It's a big job. He was overseeing tens of thousands of employees. You're not going to catch everything. But that's where the controversy arises, is that while he was on that really high perch, certain things were missed. It's just an ongoing thing. Is that going to come up as an issue if he's against Hilton? Probably not, right? Because Hilton is like the full other side of the pendulum for immigration enforcement. ICE and more crackdowns and maybe moving away from sanctuary cities.
I thought you were going to say that Hilton was the other end of the pendulum in terms of a resume, not having had a public job and having worked on Fox News.
It's more than that. So it's that he would be Trumpism being adopted at a state scale for California, right? Trump's endorsed him, which means Trump thinks that Hilton will do what Trump wants. What Trump wants for the question of immigration is extreme immigration enforcement, right? We saw this in Minnesota. We saw this. They did it in California. They did it in LA. They did it with bringing in the National Guard. There's a whole thing where the state has a role in this. And I think Becerra, despite some of the controversies, like those pale in comparison to what the alternative is. And anytime you make a decision for candidates, it's always in light of the alternatives. Does it suck that Becerra had former staffers who engaged in fraud? Yeah, it sucks, right? It doesn't look good. It looks really bad, right? Because these are people that he put into a position of trust, and clearly they weren't trustworthy. They pled guilty to fraud. That means that they lied criminally, right? They stole money, and he didn't catch it. And technically, it's his job to catch it, especially. And it looks really bad, especially because he was the Attorney General of California. So you'd think that he has a greater degree of scrutiny over the people he surrounds himself with to make sure that they're on the up and up. You would hope, right? Because remember, attorneys have to follow ethical standards. They have to speak honestly to the court. They're officers of the court. They have to. There's a whole list of moral and ethical things that attorneys in particular have to follow that your regular layperson doesn't to stay current with the bar because they can get disbarred. And so
you should speak more about that at some point. That's very interesting.
Because if there's even a whiff of impropriety on his part, it would be a really bizarre situation for the governor of California, who's also an attorney, to be disbarred while governor of California. That would be very strange, right? It could, in theory, happen if he is found to have actually participated in this. But from what I can tell from reading about it, it looks like this happened without him realizing it was happening until after the fact, right? Like that, until it got caught. And obviously the person got fired and it was criminal, right? So it was a criminal prosecution. So I assume that they're going to face sanctions of some kind, like fines and jail time maybe. Look, it's the difference between being a victim and a perpetrator. Right now it looks like he was a victim. That still carries political consequences in terms of how he's perceived. But it doesn't mean he's out of the running, right? That's the big distinction. Because if he was the perpetrator, he's out, right? You can't have somebody who's a criminal being the top person who could give pardons in California, right? That's the same kind of issue you have right now with Trump, that Trump was found guilty of a bunch of felonies, and then he pardoned on day one thousands of people found guilty of serious violent felonies, right? That's part of the issue. And one of the things happening right now, just talking about Trump, is he's trying to get immunity from prosecution in the future for tax crimes for himself and his family and his business associates. So he doesn't want just to have the get out of jail free card while he's president. No, he wants the Department of Justice, before he leaves office for his second term, to say, you know what, we're just never going to prosecute you ever again for anything in the future. How incredibly bizarre is that for a sitting president to be like, I would just really not be prosecuted in the future? Because for a president who's ethical and moral and upright and all that stuff, it wouldn't even be a question that in the future they'd be like, there might be a chance that me or some of my friends are going to commit tax crimes. So, no prosecution, right? Like, it wouldn't even be on the radar. That's what's so bizarre about it. Like,
yeah, we don't have tax-free permits in this country, and if we did, they should be very expensive.
Just to be like, not to be silly, but it reminds me of the Catholic Church selling dispensations to people that they get a seat in heaven, right? No matter the crime. Like, oh, you're a murderer. Okay, just pay us some amount. You've got a spot secured in heaven. It's like,
or going on crusade.
Do you understand the reference I'm making though? Like, that they could wash themselves free of all their they could wash themselves free of all their sins by just doing X, Y, Z.
Primary cause of the Protestant Reformation. Yeah. Cool, yeah. So, to conclude, and then you can have the last word on this topic, but to conclude, it looks like Becerra is going to be first or second in the primaries. Given that he'll be first or second, If he's against Hilton, he wins. If he's against Steyer, he wins for sure. If he's against, I think for sure, personally.
Steyer, no. So Steyer's a big question mark because it's not clear exactly how much money he's willing to spend of his own money.
But the rural Californians aren't going to vote for a San Francisco man like him. That's my personal. I don't know.
Here's the issue with general elections. So the primary election, at most, I don't know, 25%, maybe 30% of the voters are going to show up. In the general election, there could be 20, 30% more voters could decide, I'm going to vote this time around because gas prices are just way too high. I have to participate because this sucks and we need better. And Steyer can amplify his message much higher than Becerra can if Becerra can't raise the money. Because Becerra has to raise the money to get his message out. Steyer, it's not clear if he's willing to spend $1 billion to be governor of California. That's why this is the moment to stop. If they don't want Steyer to be the nominee, this is that moment. If Steyer still wants to be a problem, he could try to be a write-in candidate and go the Ross Perot route. It would be a mess.
I see what you mean. I definitely see what you mean. I guess Steyer could get if it was him versus Becerra, he could theoretically get the Democratic Party behind him. In that case, maybe he wins. I don't know. I really just think that would be a bad strategy by Democrats, personally. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so what I'm saying is if Steyer is one of the top two nominees, he's got a better chance of winning. But even if he's not, he's the one wild card in this race in that, in theory, if he really wanted to, he could run a third party write-in campaign. Steyer could technically run as a third party. I don't think he will, right? He's got a degree of honor in the sense that this is where he's going to make that effort to be one of the top two. Because the only outcome there would be that he'd be a spoiler, that Hilton would essentially win, right? That it would split the vote between him and Becerra, and that the Republican candidate would then become governor of California. I don't think they want that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any other candidate that's going to show up out of the blue and be like, I'm going to spend $1 billion to run as a third party. Just because there's no Ross Perot in the California governor race. They're not there. No.
And then the third possibility, but no, it's not going to happen. Becerra is going to be one or two. But if Steyer versus Hilton, I wonder who would win. Probably Steyer.
I think Steyer, yeah. So I think Steyer would win because if you listen to the debates, I've listened to almost all of them, they do ask that question. If you could vote for one of the other candidates, who would you vote for? And all the Democratic candidates say, I'll vote for any of the Democrats. And the Republicans say, I'll vote for the Republican, right? Those are your choices. So I think that they will coalesce around whoever the nominee is, unless there's two Democratic nominees, in which case it would be whoever they think has the best chance of winning. And I think in this particular case, Becerra has a better chance of winning because he's better at compromise and getting all the stakeholders involved. That Steyer's political positions are too polarizing. Voters vote for who they think can win. And the issue with Steyer is that he may have some really cool ideas and really interesting ideas, but they're not necessarily winning ideas because they're too absolute in their application. Stuff like rapidly increasing tax revenues or getting rid of that loophole that he wants to bring in billions of dollars. Those are the kinds of things that are polarizing because they would require a lot of political capital being spent that could be spent elsewhere, managing the problem instead of creating more problems.
Tom Steyer, good for a San Francisco dinner party, bad for winning an election in California. I just can't resist when I get little sound bites like that.
It's because California is a huge state, right? And so there's a lot of different stakeholders and communities involved. And he may be very good for urban progressive Democrats in terms of some of the stuff he's talking about, especially in response to climate change and some of the other stuff. But he may not have a winning message for rural voters or people in the mountains or people who are removed from the city centers of California and still have to live there, still have to drive there, still have to, figure out a way to survive and eke out an existence in one of the most expensive states in the country to live in, right? Like there's a whole cohort. So in that sense, the sheriff guy, he speaks for a whole cross-section of California society that is usually not represented in California governor races. And so that at least contributes to the debate in an interesting way. There's a reason it's not generally the perspective that wins, because there's just not enough of that in the electorate, right? That the more rural counties just don't have enough the numbers, right? They don't have enough voters to actually have a governor, and so they have to get their message heard somehow. And this is the opportunity. This is, I'll say that much for the Republicans. If Hilton and Bianco don't win, if for some reason Steyer and Becerra are the ones that ultimately prevail, this is the only opportunity really in the governor race for any kind of Republican viewpoint or countervailing message to even be heard, right? Because the Democratic candidates aren't going to talk about that, right? They are going to focus on like nitpicking the differences between Democratic policies. And there are differences. There are real differences. But those differences are always going to be painted in the Democratic Party light, not what's going to help Republican electorates and demographics. Anyways, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, cool. So, just really quick, one thing, and then we will move on, is it's important to just take an account of what a juggernaut per capita California is. More of it per capita that of the top economies, there's the United States, 350 million people or so. China, over 1 billion people. Germany, like 80 million. If I'm wrong on any of these, I'm actually doing this from memory, so I could be off, but like I'm pretty close. Japan, 120 or so million. UK, like 70, maybe 60, I don't know, million. India, billions. France, 60 million or so. Italy, 60 million or so. Russia, 120 million or so. Brazil, I don't even know, hundreds of millions. Canada, it gets to 40 million, which is what California is. And then Australia, 27 million, which I had to look up. California, 40 million, and it's like punching way above Canada or Australia. It's a real dynamic place. So they got problems, it's true, but just look at them. Just look at them. All right, Mondays with Mike.